Good morning. Welcome to the Point. In Lansing this week, an unusual budget process moved forward. Some would say it came to a conclusion, but others want to revisit parts of that spending plan. Governor Whitmer received a budget from lawmakers that she had not actively participated in negotiating. She used her line item veto powers 147 times and convened a board to further change the budget by transferring hundreds of millions of dollars within departments. When the dust settled, the budgets had been changed by about $1.6 billion, with nearly $1 billion disallowed by veto. I sat down with the governor to find out where that leaves the process. Governor, I've watched a lot of budget processes in this town, and this is going to be one of the most unusual that I've seen. Tell me how you came to the process. Obviously, we know the line item veto, but going through the board to rearrange financing, how did you come to that decision?
Well, Rick, you know, I introduced the budget 7 months ago, and we had a lot of time where we could have been negotiating, and the legislature, unfortunately, was never serious about fixing our infrastructure crisis despite all the talking points, and they were not serious about really negotiating budgets. So they sent me budgets in an unprecedented way, to your point, without even negotiating with me. That's the first time that's happened in recent history, where a legislature didn't even bother to have real negotiations with the governor whose signature they need. And I understand they're not used to having someone from a different party in the governor's office, but they need to negotiate. And when they chose not to, I took it upon myself to try to clean up the mess that they sent. I have to protect public safety and health. I need to run state government. And the budgets that they sent were a mess. They didn't add up. They used phony dollars. They misused money, and they had 72 pieces of boilerplate that were just unconstitutional. So I had to use my line item veto to clean them up, but also go to the state ad board to rearrange department spending so that we could do the core functions that we need to do to protect public safety.
As I listened to you on Tuesday talk about this, there was a fair amount, I would say, beyond disappointment, a little bit of unhappiness about the way this process unfolded. So here is the question. Do you and the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader have the ability to rein this all back in and start this process over? Because there was a time earlier this year when you did auto no fault, when I observed you on Mackinac Island during the Detroit Regional Chamber event, where you were having conversations one-on-one with both the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader, and they appeared to be pretty cordial. Doesn't feel that way today.
Well, unfortunately, you know, they put me in a position where I had to use executive authority to clean up the mess. Now, I don't relish doing that. I don't. I would have much preferred that we had real negotiations that were worthy of the people of Michigan and that actually protected the things that are really important to our ability to compete with the world and ensure everyone in the state has a real path to success within our borders. But the fact of the matter is, they put me in a position where I had to use every tool available to fix it. And I'm never going to shy away from doing the right thing. The right thing now is for us to put our differences aside and get back to the table and to negotiate. I want to support things like Pure Michigan that are so important for our tourism, but I can't do it to the exclusion of fundamental public safety. And so I had to make tough decisions. Doesn't mean that it's over. In fact, I think that we now have an opportunity to reset the conversation and to reprioritize and to do it together. If they choose not to come back, though, I think the people will have a say at the ballot next year, and I don't think it'll be good for anyone who's currently serving to have to show up and explain why they didn't bother to come back and fix the problems that they created. So
when you say if they don't come back, that is leaving the money, $1 billion or so that you line item vetoed. The possibility exists, though it seems unlikely to me, but the possibility exists that the legislature could decide just not to reappropriate that, right?
You look at some of the early rhetoric, and it seems to be an option. But I think once people really understand the magnitude of the actions that I had to take, they will say, okay, we need to get serious. We need to get back to the table. There are fundamental things that right now are unknowns. $43 million cut to the Department of Corrections means that the 4,000 people that were monitoring sex offenders and drunk drivers, that system will go dark by the holidays if the legislature doesn't come back and negotiate. That means we could be looking at closing up to 2 prisons and laying off hundreds of people in the state. I think that it's really important that they digest the magnitude of the actions that have been taken and get serious about prioritizing and genuinely come back and start negotiating.
If someone said that some of the actions you took were punitive, and I will point to part of the budget director's presentation when he singled out the Van Andel Institute in one of the places that the money was going to come from. Were some of those actions, no matter what the motivation, were they used in a manner to try to push legislators back to the table?
No. The fact of the matter is, the legislature sent me a budget that was fatally flawed, and I had to try to fix it. I didn't enjoy some of the decisions that I had to make. They were tough. Cutting things like the Autism Alliance or the Pure Michigan funding or Van Andel. These were things that shouldn't have been a part of the conversation in terms of line item vetoes, but they forced them to be, because when the legislature takes $400 million from across the board cuts in other parts of the budget, the fundamentals, to cobble together a talking point on roads, and it was just a talking point. That $400 million would have funded 39 miles of rebuild of a highway in a state that has 55,000 that we need to rebuild. It would have fixed 4 bridges in a state that has over 1,000 bridges that need to be rebuilt. It was devastating core functions of state government for a political talking point. And it's unconscionable, it is irresponsible, and it is incredibly dangerous. And so I had to go through the budget and find every dollar that wasn't specifically for the regular health and safety of the people of Michigan and take them out of the budget so that we could do what we need to do within state government.
I've got 30 seconds left. Give me your over-under. I asked you this back in June when you were over one of those bridges in Ferrysburg. Mm-hmm. Over-under on a supplemental spending bill in a time frame that makes sense to you?
I'm very optimistic. I wouldn't be governor if I wasn't an optimist by nature, but I'm also very serious about doing the core function that I need to protect the people of this state. I'm ready, have been ready all summer, all fall to negotiate. The time is now to put our differences aside and move forward. And that's why the supplemental I'm working on with Senator Curtis Hertel is a step, and so is the invitation I've extended to the leaders to get together tomorrow and have a real quadrant meeting.
More about that meeting in just a moment, but the governor's call for a supplemental spending bill landed with a thud in the legislature, with both the Senate Majority Leader and Speaker of the House expressing little interest in negotiating, at least right now.
The budget is done. Now we'll go on to the next round of negotiations with regards to legislation, and there's supplementals are always under consideration, so we're not saying never, but right now the budget is done.
Does that mean no supplemental budget?
Well, the governor removed herself from conversations for the last 3 weeks. The governor subsequently has now introduced and proposed a supplemental without having talked about any of the line items that she vetoed. What she did in this budget was veto services for veterans, veto services for children with autism, safety in our schools, and that's going to be felt by people all across the state. She's now trying to leverage autistic kids and our roads and our schools so we can buy her signature, and I think that's wrong.
Now, the meeting the governor talked about happened on Thursday, and while those involved generally don't talk about the substance of talks, one person familiar told me the gathering went well. When we come back, a different take on the budgets, the process, and the future. Next, To the Point. Welcome back to The Point. This morning, we're taking a look at the state budget as it is now and as it may evolve going forward. The budget has been signed and as a technical issue doesn't need further action. As a practical matter, though, the governor and Republican-led legislature may want some changes. Of course, each would likely want to change different parts of the bills. For another take on the process, Traverse City Senator Wayne Schmidt talks about his role in the budget process and what may happen next. Senator, as we wrap up this week, this will be airing on Sunday morning, but before you head back to your district from your Lansing office, it's been an unusual process when it comes to the budget. And I would say that from kind of the get-go, from a budget generated by the legislature that in the end had very little, if any, input from the governor, sent to the governor at, by the time she got it, it was pretty late in the week after everything had been gone through. They looked it over the weekend, and then she took some unusual steps with a record number of line item vetoes, and then going to the ad board and rearranging some more of the budget. So with all of that as the background, where are we now with the budget, and what should we as observers be looking for next?
Well, I think the budget, it's pretty much done. It's signed. She's made her vetoes. Governor Whitmer moved the money around as you just described, and so the budget is basically done. This is my 11th year serving as a legislator. I remember, I'm one of the few Republicans left who have served in the minority. I served under Governor Granholm, so I have that experience, having been in the minority, serving under a Democratic governor, kind of a little bit of the repeat, although now in the majority. I do think, though, that there were a number of her priorities that were in the budget. To say that we didn't include that, it's not totally fair. We made sure that, for example, I chair the K-12 appropriations budget. We made sure that there was more money in there for making sure the literacy rates for our young students is up, including summer schools. We put extra monies there. We made sure that we put more money in for special education to increase the reimbursement for at-risk students. All of those programs, many of her priorities, we in the Senate agree with those. I personally agree with those and put more money in there. And so when it came time, though, she line itemed those very items we put in there. Maybe it wasn't always to the amount she wanted, but because she didn't get 100% of what she wanted, which included that 45-cent gas tax hike that nobody seemed to like, nobody certainly introduced the legislation for it, because she didn't get 100% of what she liked, she's now holding Michigan students hostage. She was line iteming things for senior citizens, hurting law enforcement. I get it. You don't get your 45-cent tax increase, you're frustrated, but to do some of the things she did, those were her decisions, her cuts. We in the legislature, we funded them. Where we go from there, I've been telling folks, it was important to us. We put it in there. If you want it put back in, call the governor. She needs to come to us and say, hey, maybe I made a mistake, or we need to correct this. Until then, I think the budget's pretty much done.
Well, if I understand this correctly, Senator Hertel, who is the Vice Chair for Appropriations, is working on some type of a supplemental. She outlined some of the things she would like to have, and I should explain, a supplemental is a supplemental spending bill that would use some of the money that had been lined out by the governor, could be used to reappropriate that money. And again, I know you're not the only voice that would be involved in that, but is it that, from your perspective, something that at least your caucus is willing to discuss, a negotiated supplemental budget that would replace some of the things that you see as priorities, as well as some of the things she's already outlined that she would like?
As I've said before, the budget's done. It's now, we're moving forward, and those things that we put in there, we as the legislature funded, many of those things she had in her budget. One example, 10 cents a meal, kind of farm to school. I'll use that as an example. She highlighted it, it was in her budget, said it was a great program. We funded it, actually expanded the funding, making sure that Michigan grown products are in Michigan schools, some of the best farmers to give, to have that produce for our students, some of the best nutritional values there. She cut that. So I think there's a lot of confusion as to what her priorities are. So right now, the budget's done. She's going to need to come back to us and say, hey, maybe we need to correct this. But we're moving forward, already starting to look at some of the legislation I'd like to do, and working with my colleagues. And that includes, by the way, many of us in the legislature, regardless of Republican or Democrat, are still talking. Unfortunately, this was driven by the governor more. As they say, it takes two to tango, but someone has to lead, and she's the governor. So, You know, she made those decisions. She cut things that we funded. It's kind of in her lap now.
Just on the wall right over here is an outline of your district, and it strikes me that there are a couple of things that were line itemed that will impact your district like it will so many districts that are bigger, cover a lot of areas. Secondary road patrols, which was something that she did a line item on.
Yeah, well, it's kind of surprising because her big thing wasn't going to hurt public safety and, you know, the health of the state, yet she cut that. That has nothing to do with transportation.
And the other thing is rural hospitals stand to lose some money in this as well.
Again, I understand we need long-term road funding. What that has to do with finding that plan and moving forward, some of these cuts, I don't understand. We increased funding for all of those things. We were making sure we agree with the governor protecting citizens through public safety, protecting them through good health care, and we increased funding for all of those things. And she cut them. I don't get it. It has nothing to do with road funding. So again, I'm just going to continue to move forward and see what this next budget process brings.
And I get that you've said twice that the budget is done, but I brought up those two issues particularly because your district would benefit by having those things put back. So,
right, and as the senator for that district, I understand rural health care. Having grown up in Traverse City, as you noted, my district goes all the way up to Sault Ste. Marie, up to Paradise, Newberry, that whole area. It's very big. I don't understand why she did that, and hopefully we can move forward in this next budget, and I'm hoping that she hears from the constituents, not just in my district, from across the state, and says, why did you do this? And hopefully she comes back and says, hey, maybe we need to do something.
And when you say this next budget, are you talking the next budget cycle or doing something like a supplemental?
Well, that's working with Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey, Senator Jim Stamas, the Appropriations Chair. That's some of their ultimate decisions to make. I certainly am giving my input. But as I said, it's been signed, she made the cuts, she did the administration board, moved money around. That's kind of where it stands right now, so until I hear differently, I'm thinking about the next budget. I agree though. That's why I said earlier, what's that got to do with long-term road funding? Willing to work on that, have always been willing to work on that. I remember when we did the first round, the $1.2 billion we put towards roads back in 2015. That transportation budget, I also chair the transportation appropriations budget, we moved up the final payment ahead of schedule. We put an additional $375 million. I know it's one time, but that could have fixed a lot of bridges, fixed a lot of potholes, but during that time, we were continuing to work and are now. I'm willing to work with whoever, whenever, on finding that long-term road funding solution. But what that has to do with public safety, K-12 education, hospital funding, I get it. If there's going to be some tit for tat, maybe in the transportation budget, but those other things all saw increases in funding. That was the governor's decision. We funded it in the legislature. People need to talk to her about that.
Let's talk a little bit about transportation because there are two conversations. The conversation about the budget that you passed and that she ultimately line item part of it and then signed the rest of it, and the conversation about long-term road funding. First, let's start with the appropriations. What does that budget look like now with I think she cut about $375 million out of there, something like that? So it's about $1 billion, $5 billion, I mean?
Yeah, it's a little less than that. You're still going to see some of the monies from the original funding that we did in 2015, that road funding plan, which was a very good first bite at the apple. That was, again, $1.2 billion. But now we're going to have to see some of the things for freight, rail, economic development, making sure our rail's getting some of the heavier trucks off the road. Things like that, that's kind of on hold because of some of the moves she made. So people are still going to see orange cones and barrels out on the roads. We're still going to be fixing the roads. Maybe just not quite as many, and maybe there's some bridges that are going to be put off again. That's what was so disappointing, and as someone who has worked on it, I've chaired transportation in the House, I'm chairing transportation now, the appropriations in the Senate, having done this for much of my public service career, both as a state elected official and as even a county commissioner. Disappointed. There were ways to take, let's say, a shot across the bow by the governor, but to, again, take some of these monies that could have been put there, and because it wasn't, I didn't get enough, I'm going to cut it. Well, that didn't make a lot of sense to me because we have been working on things. Somebody leaked it, I think it was possibly the governor's office, leaked that we were discussing plans, which, and it's tough to say this, because you get the Republicans, oh, nobody wants to raise taxes as a Republican, or Democrats only just want to raise them. Well, I have to admit, 45 cents was a little excessive, and that's what the Democratic governor proposed. But there is a reasonable ground there, and those conversations were happening. And so this kind of eroded some of that trust and discussion, but I'm hoping that I like to jokingly say the caucus of the sane and rational is going to come back together and figure out what is that next step for a long-term road funding proposal.
We're about out of time, but you anticipated my next question as we talk about long-term, and I don't want to, I don't expect you to negotiate a roads deal with the governor through me, so I'm not expecting that. But at some point, that question has to be asked.
Right.
Can you fix the roads adequately in a 10-year or 15-year period of time with existing revenues? And a lot of people I talk to in this town, on both sides of the aisle, say new revenue may be needed. So is that part of the conversation, raising taxes to fix roads?
Well, if you're going to be blunt, there is discussion of that, and yes. The question is how much do we need? How fast do we need it? This was a problem in the making for decades, and you can't just, no matter what number that is finally agreed upon, and it's somewhere between, let's say, 1.4 and 1.8 billion dollars. You can't just turn on a switch and just have it all go in. The capacity isn't there. But if we were to do something over the next 5 to 10 years, I'd say probably 5 years in terms of ramping up funding, and then looking at a 5 to 10 year plan of how it's implemented. And I've been talking with road commissions and industry experts. That's kind of the sense of where we're going. Again, making sure the $1.2 billion plan that we did in 2015, that good first bite at the apple, is fully implemented, seeing how that's working, phasing in another step. That's probably the way we do it. And those discussions will continue. I am the eternal optimist. A little frustrated right now, as you could probably tell, but at the end of the day, there are too many good people here in Lansing, too many good people in the state who want to work together, find that plan, fix the roads, just quite frankly make this a better state. And so I'm not going to let some of the frustrations and disappointment, cloud our vision going forward. And like I said, I think we'll get there. It's just going to take a little bit more elbow grease and rolling up the sleeves a little bit longer and getting the job done.
The legislature will come back into session Tuesday, and there will no doubt be more talk of supplemental spending and trying to restore priorities for both lawmakers and the governor. But before anything can happen, there will have to be some serious negotiation, the kind that has eluded the two sides to date. I'll have a final thought next. To the point. In government, when a deal is reached and everyone's a little unhappy, it's often thought to be a good one, since all sides gave something and got something to make it work. I've seen that play out a number of times, but just because both sides are unhappy doesn't necessarily mean it's a good deal. Right now, there are plenty of people that are unhappy in Lansing, but we'll see what happens with this budget deal, and it may be some time before we know if it's a good one or not. We'll be following that in the weeks to come, and I'll see you next Sunday morning at 10 o'clock right here, To the Point.